My guest is Nick Ward, the Chief Information Officer of the Drug Enforcement Administration in the Justice Department. Nick, welcome to the Cloud Exchange. It's so great to have you.
Hi, Jason. Thank you. It's great to be here.
As part of our three-day event here, and we talk about the cloud, it's really looking at how the national security side, the law enforcement side is really taking advantage of cloud services, taking advantage of all the agility, the security, to really help improve how you meet your mission. So, Nick, I'm actually going to start before that because you've been the CIO at the DEA since December. So we're pushing about 9 months, give or take. And I want to just know how that transition's going from being the Justice Department's Chief Information Security Officer. Talk about a little bit about your learning curve. How have you kind of adjusted to the new role?
Sure. I've been in the federal space for quite some time. I started off my career in the military, and frankly, I think being a CISO before becoming a CIO has been pretty beneficial, and it's really helped me take on the role here at DEA. Some examples is, historically there has been some resistance to using cloud services, but bringing in that really hardcore security lens on top of how we do things can show us how we can get a lot of those advantages for cloud services and do it in a safe way. So we got to go into this not being afraid of new technology, not afraid to use it, but we do have to understand how it works and how to do it safely. And so bringing in that background has really helped me a lot. And that background has also really helped me in the way that, a CIO has to be really close to the mission, really understand why we need all these different kinds of resources. And having that kind of background has helped me also to really look at, these aren't IT systems. We don't do email just to do email, right? We're doing all this technology's there to help us complete the mission of the Drug Enforcement Administration successfully. So that's kind of the lens that I bring to being the CIO here. And it's been fun trying to take a different tact on it and being able to really focus on mission outcomes more than as a CISO.
One of the things you brought up I thought was interesting is this idea of helping the DEA understand that cloud is not so scary or we can't be so hesitant to give it a try. Maybe walk me through a little bit of those conversations when you go into the mission areas, when you start talking to folks about IT modernization and upgrades, and we'll get down to that path in a second. But what are those conversations like? I mean, do you bring up, hey, let me put my CISO hat on here? Because remember, when I was at the CISO of DOJ, here's what we did. I know you worked with Melinda Rogers closely and get into to kind of continue that IT modernization. And then sometimes you have to put your CIO hat on and say, but I understand also that this has got to be key to your mission. How do you strike that balance?
So it's interesting, right? Like when I go in and I talk to mission owners, they really don't have a big opinion on cloud versus not cloud. It's really bringing along my staff and the culture of being that putting data into a cloud, somebody else's system. It just sounds scary, right? So it's really having more of the conversations with teams that are building the technologies and talking about this is going to have multiple benefits. One, it's going to benefit your career personally because we're going to get you in a place where you're really good at doing cloud securely. And then the other part is it is helpful for me that I don't get into a place where I have to struggle with those conversations as much because they do recognize that I am coming from the security world. So I think that brings with me some credibility and some trust when I talk to business leaders that I'm not just going to go into these cloud systems in a gung-ho type of way that's going to be dangerous. So they recognize that. And fortunately for me, I think it actually makes those conversations a bit easier. I will say that Administrator Milgram and DEA has been very eager to adopt this kind of technology because they want modern capabilities. They want to be able to move very quickly. And so they've been very supportive of going in this direction even before I got here.
Let's talk a little bit about where you're at then. I know one of the big challenges with any sort of new CIO comes in, you start, okay, where are we at today? Where are we going? How are we spending our money? So what's the current state of your technology? We can talk about money. We can talk about O&M versus DME. We can get into the details, but just give me a sense of where you're at today with that IT modernization effort.
So we have a lot of work to do. DEA had been very progressive in the past, but some of those systems have started to show their age, whether that be a case management system or the way that we've developed applications. A lot of the applications that we use at DEA today are very customized applications, which does present a challenge, but also an opportunity. We're going to be able to take a lot of the efforts that were done in terms of what kinds of capabilities that we've had in the past, and be able to use those to focus it on building. My focus now is, frankly, is to build a major data platform and really what we refer to as a mission OS that really is trying to pull together all the functions and capabilities for DEA. So we don't have a lot of bespoke singular applications. Embracing the idea that we really want to make the applications that we run, take it from a more of like a commercial perspective, run it like a business. These applications should be products, and we're going to build the business functions and the development processes that we can make them into, just like a commercial company has to always be developing on their application to keep it current, to keep it modern. That's the direction that we're moving into. And that's going to, we're not going to try to just lift and shift all of our applications. We're really rebuilding this with that mindset. We're going cloud first for that.
We'll get into the details in a second, but it's interesting when you talk about really trying to take that commercial view, because it's not something we see very often in the law enforcement, national security community, wanting to kind of adopt some of those best practices. Sometimes it's a little harder to do that. Can you just give me a sense now of for instance, how much the IT budget and how much money you think you're spending on that kind of older legacy technology? Do you have any data you can share?
I can't get into specifics, but I would say a significant percentage of our budget is spent on O&M efforts. It's certainly in excess of 50%. But that's kind of one of our key things. We really do want to get into that product type mentality. And so we want to push a lot more of that budget into a DME type of budget. Our vendors don't really allow us to buy in a capital budget kind of environment today, right? And so with that, along with the idea that if I also know that if I buy things in bulk, or if I spend a big chunk of budget on O&M or really a capital investment, I'm going to be in that debt in 5 years pretty quickly. And so I have to put most of my funding towards DME type efforts. And that's kind of why we're actually taking this idea of having product lines and managing our programs like their products, so we can show like how we're spending that money to continually keep things modern, and we don't get into the same kind of debt as we are today.
I know, just looking back over the last several years, and the idea of technical debt has been a big push from the Office of Management and Budget and other parts of the government to really try to, okay, how do we attack that? So it's good to hear that you all are attacking it in your own way. Obviously, you mentioned the cloud at first, and then as well as the product line. So maybe let's jump into some of your IT priorities. What is on your plate beyond everything and anything? And maybe give me the top 2, top 5. I don't know, Nick, tell me what you're trying to work on over the next 6 or 9 months.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very clear for us. We're very hyper-focused on the DEA mission, and to that end, we're building a data platform and this mission OS to really wrap it all together. So what does that mean, right? Today we have a lot of very valuable, very useful data, and it's siloed in separate applications, and makes it a challenge for our agents to be able to use that data to do what they need to do successful investigations in some cases. So we're pulling that together. We're making sure that we have the right security controls, the right governance around that data in a single type of platform. That's the number one priority. And then right there alongside of that is this mission OS. we call it that. It's, it started out with the idea that we need to modernize our case management system, but we wanted to go way beyond that. We wanted to make it a differentiator for how DEA attacks our mission. So we can have different views and different ways that a DEA agent versus an intel analyst might log into the system, how they access data, how they analyze data from a common platform. And that is customizable. So it's not so rigid for our users and the way they come into that system and use that data. And that's really my focus. I'm very closely aligned with our chief data officer in that regard. So she is working towards building the governance aspects of it, making sure that we understand our data and have very good use of our data. And we're building the infrastructure, the applications, and the technology to be able to leverage it to the fullest extent.
I think it's the big data platform. Let's delve into that a little bit. It's obviously we're talking about a platform that's going to either be very similar to software as a service, or at least maybe sit on an infrastructure cloud service of sorts. Mm-hmm. And is this something that you're looking for through an acquisition potentially? Is there an acquisition strategy, or maybe there's already one that's already been done? Can you give us any more background about kind of where that platform is today and where it's heading?
Yeah, it's clearly going to be a collection of products, but we will use software as a service for sure. The major cloud vendors will be involved, as you would expect. Today, at this point, we're leveraging the work of the Department of Justice to put in blanket purchase agreements for things like AWS and Azure, and to be able to take advantage of those things quickly and speed up our ability to do that development. We're currently evaluating other low-code, no-code solutions to help speed up development of our workflows and things like that will go into the application. And we're meeting with other partners that have similar efforts underway to see how they're doing the same things and what vehicles that they're utilizing. So I would say we're in some regards, we're in pretty early stages, but we are looking at vehicles that are in place so we can move quickly, because we do need to try to do this as fast as possible.
The other thing you mentioned, you said you're looking at other partners. I imagine that's within the Justice Department, or at least within the law enforcement environment sector, to say, okay, what is ATF doing, or what is FBI doing, and see if you could borrow, beg, steal from them, as well as potentially someone in the Treasury Department or DHS. How are those conversations happening? I mean, do you foresee, like, that sounds to me like your quickest path to getting to modernization, at least today?
We need capability into our agents' hands. So we've talked to FBI. A lot of our beginning stages were actually some of the work that they did on how they built their data lakes. We probably won't do it exactly like they're doing it. Our mission is a little different and our volumes are different, but we are certainly learning from what they did and using what they learned in their efforts to guide what we're doing here at DEA. But we're not stopping there. We certainly look at some of the work ATF's done on, and U.S. Marshals has done in terms of modernizing their case management systems. And beyond the Department of Justice, I won't call out specific agencies, but the law enforcement organizations across DHS, for example, we are meeting with them to see similar efforts that they've done. And even in situations where we have shareable code, we've discussed we've had conversations about how can we open up our code repositories to each other in situations that make sense to be able to speed up both of our efforts, right? Like, you give me your code, I'll give you mine. Let's make this true open source within the federal government.
When we hear about things like that, I think doesn't get enough attention in government, because people think, oh, well, here's Nick just going to build from scratch again. I don't think that happens as often as people think it does. I think I think the government sometimes gets a bad sense. And if you can get that 80% solution, if you can get 90% there and just worry about the 10% that matters to the DEA mission or has some specific DEA pieces, that's going to save you a ton of time. I mean, do you have a goal of when you like to get this data lake up and running, even in maybe a limited fashion, or is it already there? And right now you're moving from you're at beta and you want to get to alpha or alpha to beta, whatever. I've never developed anything, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, we've got some proof of concepts actually in place today for certain like certainly on the data platform side. But I mean, we really want to have like version 1, within a year. So we want to have a usable. This is kind of like where agile development really comes into play, right? We want to have iterative capability that we can provide to the field very quickly. So within a year, we intend to have the base system that is viable for usage, and fully acknowledging that that's not the end of the road. I mean, these are forever projects, right? Like we're always going to need case management. It is always going to need to be modernized and have new capabilities so we can stay on the leading edge. And we don't envision replacing all these other systems within a year, but we're going to be pulling in capabilities from these other systems. We're focused on creating service layers so we can actually, when we do develop some custom application for whatever reason, we're putting in the right kinds of things to have a layer where that's reusable across all of our applications. So it's not like if we create a deconfliction application, right? Like that should be usable from a mobile app, or it should be usable from our web UI that we provide to our agents. It shouldn't matter, right? So that's kind of the strategy that we're taking. And within a year, we plan to have that first version out.
Something obviously to follow up with you as you kind of make it through it. I think there's gonna be a lot of interest on a big data platform like that, especially as it starts impacting the mission side. The other side of this is the cloud itself. Maybe we talk a little bit about how you're using the cloud today. Maybe even offer one or two examples of those cloud services that are currently in process or you're thinking about putting in process in the mission areas. How is the cloud impacting DEA today?
So there's already some usage of software as a service type of situations today. Things like we do leverage some of the very common body-worn camera systems, for example. We also, if you think about like when very basic solutions, like we need to be able to, we have to communicate on the internet. So we are leveraging services to be able to search the internet and things like that in a safe way. We've already actually jumped into the cloud-based IDP space for identity and access management kind of stuff. And that one actually is going to be pretty crucial across all. I mean, identity is going to be very important for us for security and for being able to get into our systems wherever. But that's already in place today. So there's already been some adoption of SaaS-based cloud services. We're just really getting started in the infrastructure side, I would say. We had small amounts in the infrastructure services like AWS and Azure, but we're moving much more aggressively on that now. But we're really kind of starting out by building our Cicd pipelines and things like that to make sure that we have the right processes as we move things over there. And then, that's the big ones that we have in place today. But you can imagine if there's interesting, useful SaaS services that are being used by other law enforcement agencies, we're likely using some of those today.
I would definitely want to go into the identity and access management piece. But before I go there, I also want to talk about the Cicd Pipeline. You mentioned the move toward more of a product focus approach to developing apps. How are you changing up your office? How is that? How are you kind of evolving to say, okay, here's a team that's going to focus on the data lake as an example, or here's a team that's going to focus on the body-worn camera / officers and agents. Talk a little bit about the setup of your office in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, today as you can imagine, we are structured in a pretty classic CIO organization with operations on one team. Each of our teams had their own engineering teams. We had a separate development team. We had a separate engineering organization, and then we have like the cats and dogs, like where we've had. If you think about it, like some mission organizations with DEA had their own IT shops. So that's consolidated today into one organization. And we're having those, we haven't finalized what our org will look like in the future, but we've already started. I have a CTO, Alex Smith, and we've been working on aligning all the engineering across all of the entire organization under the CTO, for instance. That's where we're going to put a lot of our strategy, like cloud strategy will be under the chief technology officer. And we've actually put DevSecOps really there as well, so we can make sure that it's pushed across the organization. But we are in that process right now of reimagining what will our organization look like? How will we align, develop, like when we go to DevSecOps teams, like the traditional idea that these are separate organizations isn't going to work, right? I need to have operations people or capabilities at least within the development teams, and they need to be able to make changes. So where my CISO is working, putting a lot of her effort is in that CI/CD pipeline, making sure that we have the governance around what they can do. So my dev teams can basically go to town. They can do whatever they want. They can make network changes. They can make all the changes are going to be self-documented through this framework. So they don't have to have the classic restrictions and 2-week change management processes to make updates. And that's the, we're not there. We're not done yet. It's a journey, right? And we're working on a restructuring of our organization to be able to support that.
And I imagine as part of that CI/CD pipeline for DevSecOps is this idea of the continuous ATO, the idea that every change goes through, you mentioned governance, every change goes through a process, hopefully automated process at that, to ensure that you're not putting in malicious code or there's bugs or just vulnerabilities that maybe you don't know about. Where are you with that DevSecOps development? I mean, it sounds like the very beginning stages.
The very beginning, but we're not starting from scratch, right? There's been a lot of work. Like when if we talk to a CBP, which has been very forward leaning in this space, and the Department of Justice has built a service for ATO automation that is really built around CI/CD pipelines. So we're using the work that they've done to try to speed up the implementation of ours. Certainly, our vendors that we work with bring a lot of domain knowledge in this space. So so we're bringing that in too to speed up the implementation of a CI/CD pipeline for DEA. It is relatively new for DEA, but there's a lot of expertise and a lot of things that we're bringing to bear to be able to speed that up for DEA.
Appreciate your fact that you're actually are begging, borrowing, stealing from others within the DOJ family. Maybe talk just a little bit about the service for automation for the ATOs and security. I think that's a really interesting piece because everyone struggles with this. Is that something that is being used across justice? Or are you one of the early users at DEA to take advantage of it? Or has this been a service that's been around for 20 years and I'm just hearing about it?
No, it's relatively new and obscure, I think, and not well known at this point. But what they did was they built it's almost like a platform as a service. They took the technologies like Terraform and Ansible Tower and things like that to automate the implementation of security controls. And then probably the more interesting thing that they've done that will be more usable across DOJ and maybe even other agencies is that they started writing and seeing how they can implement the FISMA controls as code, right? So they essentially, how can we automate the checks of all of the security controls that have to happen? And they're doing it in a way that is subscribable so that if they keep it up to date, they can push it out to DEA, for instance, as a subscription of sorts. I think they would certainly welcome a customer to deploy their applications into their PaaS environment to do this, but they've done it in a way so that's not going to work for a lot of agencies, right? DEA is not probably going to be able to push our entire application into their solution, but I can subscribe to their security content and be able to apply the scripts and the security checks that they've already developed in my environment.
Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm sorry to do this. This is something. Is this a Nick Ward thing that you started before you left, or did it come after Nick? I don't want to make you feel bad if it came after you.
No, it started while I was up there. So I was familiar with, I keep close touch, obviously, with the department even after I've left. But this is a project that began probably a year and a half to 2 years ago.
I kind of figured that because nothing happens that quickly in government. But well, sometimes it's you got to remove the humbleness of people to say, yes, that's just something that I knew about it and I'm adopting because I figured it was a good idea. When we talk about modernization and cloud and the pieces of moving forward, it's really, and you said this early on about driving emission effectiveness, improving how agents in the field from DEA are really getting the data they need to make better decisions. Can you talk a little bit about whether it's cloud or other efforts, how you're focused in that area too? How is the mission side brought into DevSecOps? How is the mission side, how are you meeting with them to say, what are your problems? How can I help solve them through technology?
Yeah, I mean, so DEA has actually historically had a lot of committees and a lot of boards try to pull that together, but we have taken a little bit of a different tact on that because it became a little bit, I would say, over like too many people at the table to be able to make efficient decisions, right? So where we're building now is really trying to focus on something Naomi, our CDO, did as I was joining DEA was to really engage with GSA on some efforts to create this program called Ideate. And we saw that, we've embraced it. They provided a lot of human-centered design type of training to DEA, and I mean we're going to run with that. It really showed a lot of value in terms of we do need to bring human-centered design to DEA. We need to have people out there understanding the problems that our agents have on the ground, at headquarters, from all the different perspectives to make sure we're solving the right problems. So that's what I would say is probably the big thing that we're focused on how we can be closer to the mission is really embracing that idea of human-centered design and using that to really drive the direction that we take our applications.
And if folks aren't familiar with Ideate, it's this idea of almost like what we used to call crowdsourcing, right? Like, hey, tell us where your problems are, and they get voted up and voted down, and people weigh in. That's what you're trying to do, asking the mission folks to kind of give you that feedback in as often as necessary.
Yeah, it was a competition that we ran, and they were able to make very Shark Tank like kind of competition to bring ideas and get some support to implement some of the ideas from the field.
Is there anything you can share? Any ideas that really stood out to you? Anything that you've started the process? Say, okay, let's attack this problem, or let's take this idea and make it a pilot. Anything like that?
I mean, our CDO would certainly be in a better position to talk to the different proposals that were made. But one example that I think we're actually moving out on pretty quickly on is the way that they do the tip line. It was a challenge for the agency and the previous tip lines, and so they've gone forward with that project. And I believe that a procurement was made, and they're getting ready to roll that out here in the next several months. So the way we do deconfliction, evidence tracking and things were some other Ideate type of proposals that we're using to really drive the direction of Mission OS also. So a lot of the proposals came up with some really good ideas that will help us drive the future of what we are referring to as Mission OS.
You think something as simple as a tip line, right? A way for people to tell DEA, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm hearing. But sometimes it's the easy stuff that you forget, the low hanging fruit, as it's commonly called, that kind of really does make a big difference for the mission side.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said about identity and access management, and that can lead us into this discussion, which I'm sure you're excited about, zero trust as a former CISO. how are you using IDAM today differently than maybe previously? And then we can talk zero trust. What's the improvement or what's the change that you've made around identity and access management?
We started this, I mean, like Alex Smith and I had started collaborating on identity before, while I was the CISO at DOJ. And so DEA had started to go down this journey before I even got here. But now that I'm here, one of the reasons that we're really embracing cloud-based identity and access management is really twofold. One, I need to be able to get unified access and access management across all of my applications. I need to know who my people are, what their roles are, what attributes they have. So that's one big part. And where that really shows up in the applications, if I have to log into certain app, and we see this when we have conversations with some of our investigators, is they struggle because they have too many accounts, right? I have to log into this system to pull this data out, like to pull out one type of data, and that's not useful by itself. So I've got to log into this other system and pull that data out. So it's both a data problem and an access problem. And those are also two different accounts, and they don't necessarily synchronize when a person changes roles or something like that. So it's can be a challenge to manage. And then beyond that, when I start thinking about, we have like Diversion's mission has a pretty big external user base. We have millions of users that log into Diversion systems today. And it's critical that those systems are up, that we know who those people are, that they're vetted as well as they can be, from the perspective of that's from the public, right? And it could be a big vulnerability, and we're leveraging some of the more modern ways to do identity proofing. And so we're relatively sure who is logging into our systems, and that's going to be important for us. And Diversion's not the only one. We collaborate with state and local law enforcement agencies, and that's a lot of different small organizations that I mean, you can watch the news that they are targets for cyber attacks. So I have to have a good way to make sure that I know who's logging into my system, and I'm reasonably sure that it is who they say they are when they're trying to log into my system. So that's why we're really putting a lot of focus on good identity management for our external user base.
And in case folks aren't familiar, you said diversion system. Is that something that's outward facing? Is that something an internal system?
It's outward. It's not. Diversion is not a system. Diversion Control is an organization of DEA that really deals with the diversion of prescription drugs and making sure that we have good tracking of that. I'm not going to go into their full mission, but but that's what they're. So I mean, there's a couple major parts DEA that people are familiar with would be, the illegal drugs and things like that, and diversion is the prescription drug side of DEA.
I appreciate that. Just sometimes, we all kind of can fall into our code, and sometimes the listener may say, "Is that a system? Was that an effort?" So anyway, so I appreciate just the brief explanation. How are you doing IDAM differently today than maybe you did a year ago, 5 years ago? I mean, HSPD 12, as you all know, has been around for almost 20 years now. And this idea of privilege access and ensuring folks have that PIV card to get onto the network is not new, but it sounds like what you're doing is the next level down.
First off, I mean, PIV's not going anywhere, right? But we do have challenges with PIV. I mean, our foreign users, we have people across the entire globe, right? We're in I don't know the total number of countries, but it's certainly well into the double digits of different countries that DEA has offices in. And it can be challenges if PIVs break or they can't get them for some reason. They've been overseas for a long time and there's not a US access place to go get a PIV card from. That's an issue for us. And it makes it a challenge because what do I do if something does happen or they can't get a PIV? Like historically, what I would have to do in that is essentially make an exception and allow them to use a username and a password. And that's incredibly dangerous in today's world. So what we're doing is making sure that we have backup authentication mechanisms And then in certain cases, they're primary authentication mechanisms that are utilizing strong authenticators. So if that's giving them a security key like a YubiKey, and putting derived like PIV type certificates on them, or using FIDO2 authentication to get into our applications, we're going to do that to make sure we have good, strong ways to still authenticate, even if the user doesn't have a PIV. So that's probably the biggest change that we've made. I would say last year we started going down the road with Cloud IDP, and before that, it was a lot of our applications really had a couple choices. They either connected to one of several Active Directory domains within DEA, or they implemented their own user and access management within their applications. And we're working towards centralizing that across all of our applications, making sure every application has MFA. A year ago, that was certainly not the case. We've talked with our partners to make sure they understand MFA is going to be a hard requirement for accessing DEA systems. And we have to work with them on that. And that wasn't a case a year ago, and it will be by the end of this year. Most of them have already been completed, but.
And adding that MFA, I mean, it's something we're seeing in our personal life, right? I remember this years ago. It's been 2 or 3 years ago. You go to the gas station, you put your credit card in, they ask you for your zip code. I mean, that is an example of MFA. It's a very weak one per se, but if I've stole Nick's credit card, I may not know where Nick actually lives, and I'd have to guess on his zip code. And if you're from somewhere else, I get it wrong and I'll get rejected. But I think if people are much more confident, and they're much more comfortable with this idea of, okay, I need 2 factors to get on. I imagine you haven't seen a lot of pushback across DEA. Yeah.
No. And I mean, and honestly, like the systems that these people log into house data that they care about. I mean, I don't think they want it to be compromised. So we really haven't had much pushback at all on implementing MFA.
When we talk other cybersecurity and a former CISO, I know it's dear to your heart, but I know there can be some sensitivities. Can you give me a sense of what are some of your other priorities around cybersecurity as it relates to either cloud or just mission critical systems and IT modernization? How does it all fit together? Zero trust. Let's talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, I'll start with zero trust because I mean that one is kind of near and dear to my heart. I was pushing this pretty hard while I was at DOJ, and I, as a CIO, it certainly has a lot of security benefits, right? But it also has a lot of mission enablement benefits that we don't probably talk about enough. The idea that I can use zero trust networking to be able to empower the ability for instance, like if I have an agent doing an investigation, they may be in the office one day, they may be out on a scene somewhere collecting evidence, they may be doing surveillance. They could be anywhere, right? I need to make sure that our systems are available to them wherever they go. And zero trust is something that actually gives me a way to do that in a safe way. It performs well. And it's going to probably, in the long run, it'll probably save me some money too, because I don't have to have these very draconian VPN capabilities. I don't have to have the level of network infrastructure I have to have today if I do zero trust right. And so my first priority is making sure that I have the applications and the capabilities for my agents. And then that won't be far. We're working on that, not quite as aggressively as we are on getting the applications in place, but it is also, it's a big priority for my CISO, let's say, and my network team to figure out how can we do zero trust and utilizing software-defined networking and cloud. We're looking at cloud-based technologies to be able to bring zero trust to bear as well. So that is the big one. It offers a lot of security and operational benefit for us by utilizing zero trust.
Nick, I'm glad you brought up the software-defined networking, some cloud-based technologies. Obviously, more to come there. I'm sure you're working closely with the Justice Department headquarters on this, which actually is a great segue. what other shared services, what other ways are you taking advantage of some of that modernization efforts done at the headquarters level to really push DEA forward? You mentioned obviously the automation and security. Are there other kind of those enterprise-wide services you're looking at or using?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of them, and that's been a pretty big priority for me coming to DEA. Really, it was to improve our collaboration on enterprise services. One of those is that we are in the process today of migrating over to the Office 365 tenant that DOJ manages. So they're through their enterprise collaboration services, and so I think we are one of the last DOJ components to do the migration. We aren't the only ones, but we're one of the last components to be migrating onto that platform, and it's going to have a lot of benefits for us. We're going to have easier collaboration with other DOJ components through things like Teams that will be beneficial to DEA that we didn't have in the past. Some other areas in the realm of security, as part of the CDM program, DOJ partnered with them to get an enterprise EDR solution from CrowdStrike is what they got through CDM program, and we've adopted that across DEA very broadly. That'll save us some money at DEA for sure, and also it increases our capability. And along that same lines, DOJ has their Justice Security Operations Center, and one of the areas that we struggle with at DEA is being able to have enough people, enough skilled people to do certain things, and one of those obviously is in cybersecurity. So over the past several months, my CISO has been working with DOJ on how can we get more out of the JSOC? How can we get them to provide, at least provide very tailored security monitoring for DEA when I don't have the staffing to cover nights and weekends, and I can actually reallocate some of those resources on being more focused on the more important security events and more focused on developing out those secure DevSecOps frameworks and things like that, so they can do the higher level work that we need to do. We'll leverage the JSOC more extensively in order to be able to do that. Just a couple examples.
Were you a little surprised when you got to DEA that Office 365 was either not done or not in the works, or was it still the very beginning stages? You think that's like the lowest of low hanging fruit when we started talking about cloud back in 2010, 2011, or did you probably knew that too coming in being the CISO?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did know that. I mean, I knew who was in Office 365 for DOJ. DEA had started looking at Office 365 as a solution, but hadn't committed on a direction yet. There was whether DEA would have gone with their own Office 365 tenant, participated in the departments, or continued to be on Exchange. So I wasn't surprised, but only because I was aware of that particular thing. What was probably surprising was the very large, our data is very sensitive, right? DEA has very sensitive data, and because of that, that was the fear of going into cloud systems, whether that be email or anything else. And there are situations where there's fears about how things could be viewed, like could our email easily be viewed? And there probably are times where we benefited by having that separation, but largely though, we get into a situation where we have to put so much resources into managing these O&M systems that it becomes untenable and difficult for us to be able to provide the capabilities that we really need across DEA. So we are embracing cloud now because it's going to allow us to redirect a lot of those people onto the harder, more mission-focused problems rather than managing patches on thousands of servers.
Nick, I very much enjoyed our conversation. We're just about out of time, but before I let you go, I got to ask the important question, because a lot of vendors do listen to the show and then tune into the Cloud Exchange. What's your advice to them about working with your office? Do you want emails? Do you not want emails? Do you meet with vendors? Do you not meet with vendors? give me a sense of how you want, what's your message to the vendor community who you may now get a ton of emails from our conversation.
No, I like engaging with vendors. We need to know what's out there and what's available. Obviously, we've got a lot going on, so we can't respond to every single one all the time. But my CTO shop is certainly ready to accept, scheduling and engaging with vendors, so we understand the vendor landscape. And that's probably when the vendors do email me, I will engage with our CTO shop to make sure that we get everybody that we can on a schedule to see what capabilities that they can bring to DEA. But I welcome engagement with the vendor community. We can't really be successful without them. So
I will apologize up front for all the emails you'll get from our conversation today, but you did a great job, and I've learned a lot. And let me thank my guests, because we're out of time for today. Nick Ward is the Chief Information Officer of the Drug Enforcement Administration in the Justice Department. Nick, thank you so much for taking time. It was great to catch up and hear about all the great work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jason. I had a great time.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cloud Exchange.